Michael McCaul, great to have you here in Australia.
Oh, thanks, Sharri. It's great to be here.
So you're on a trip focusing on the Pacific, and it's really highlighted China's coercion in the region, its assertiveness, aggressiveness. Australia is very much in the front line of this battleground. What has concerned you since you've been here?
I think the level of hostility from China. I was in Taiwan after President Li's inauguration. They formed a blockade around the island and had war games that they exercised that our Indo-PACOM analyzed after the fact. The hostilities we saw in the Philippines when I was just there. We have these defense sites, but there's this territory, disputed waters according to China, where they warn the Filipinos, you're in China sovereignty, please leave and return, when in fact it's Filipino waters. One little miscalculation could escalate, and that's what I worry about.
Yeah, and that's the concern, that there could be a misinterpretation of something that could spark a bigger conflict. We have seen China be quite aggressive in several instances to Australia's military in the past 12 months. There was, I don't know if you know about them, but there was an incident with Navy divers, a near miss in the air as well. Do you think this is part of China's deliberate tactics to keep Australia on edge?
No, there's no question. I think Chairman Xi has been very, he's very ambitious, but he's been very clear about his ambitions, and that is global economic and military domination. He wants the South China Sea. He wants the islands in the Pacific, and all that directly threatens, I think, Australia, at home. And we've seen signs of all this aggression taking place, and it does worry me to see not only the rhetoric, but the actions that are following.
China's rise in the Pacific has come almost as a shock to some extent. The security ties, the financial ties. President Xi, over the past month, has been hosting Pacific nation leaders. Do you think this is a reflection that perhaps the US and Australia were slow to realise just how China was moving in on the Pacific, and that perhaps there needed to be some more leadership shown in this area?
Well, I think there's been an awakening in the Pacific. I know the prior administration, I'd worked with Mike Pompeo very closely. We saw the threat from China back then. We warned the island nations, Australia. I think there was a sort of denial that they didn't want that to happen. If you go back 7 years ago, there was a lot of economic ties, a sort of ambivalence, not wanting to admit that a threat actually existed. But I think now most people in Australia, certainly your leadership, all understand the threat that China poses in the region. Yeah.
There are concerns about China invading or a reunification with Taiwan. What time frame do you expect this could happen in? And are you confident that the US would intervene and come to Taiwan's defense or aid in the event that that should happen?
That's a great question. I mean, unlike Ukraine, Taiwan cannot win this by themselves. They would need the help of the United States and the allies in the Pacific. And I think the people of the United States will have to answer that question, the people of Australia. But I will tell you, the one thing that gives me some hope in the last year and a half are these alliances we've seen take place between Japan, South Korea, who were bitter enemies, the Philippines, all being allies, reaching out to Vietnam, and now Indonesia, and now recently AUKUS, United States, UK, and Australia coming together in an alliance to basically deter this malign influence that we're seeing from China. Remember, we don't have a NATO in the Pacific like we have in Europe. And so the alliances are so important. And that has come together rather well. In addition, the supplemental bill that I helped get passed provided funding for the region and for protection. And then the final piece that I got passed in the Congress was the AUKUS.
Yeah, very important. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. But just to clarify that answer, when you say it would be up to the American people and the Australian people whether America would come to the aid of Taiwan, given, as you just said, it wouldn't be able to defend itself without that help. So do you think it's not, we don't know for certain whether the US would step in? That's an open question at this point.
Well, I think deterrence is key. You project power, strength, you get peace. You project weakness, you invite aggression, conflict, and war. And I think that's where we're seeing ourselves today, whether it be in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, Middle East, and now I call it two hot wars and one hot zone, right here. I think ultimately the American people would, because they don't want to see an aggressive communist China. But they also would need to be educated as to why an island off the coast of China is so important. And we can talk about freedom and democracy. But TSMC, I had a recent tour. That's 90% of the advanced global manufacturing of semiconductor chips for the world. If China invades Taiwan, that facility shuts down, and so does 90% of the global supply of advanced semiconductor chips. Think about the economic downturn, the economic chaos and catastrophe that would bring to the world.
You are on a bipartisan trip, but do you think there would be a different position should Kamala Harris be in the White House versus Donald Trump when it comes to coming to Taiwan's defense?
Yeah. I can tell you this, the current administration, I think, is responsible for a lot of this aggression we've seen. We haven't led like the United States has in the past, and we've invited aggression. And quite frankly, it started with Afghanistan. I know Donald Trump would tell you this never would have happened under his watch. I personally agree with that. When I talked to him, he said, look, I told Putin, if you invade Ukraine, I'm going to hit you hard. And he told, Chairman Xi, excuse me, if you invade Taiwan, I'm going to bomb the out of you. And you know what? He meant it. And that's a fear factor of deterrence that we really don't see from this administration. But we had it then. We don't have that now. And I think Kamala Harris would just be an extension of the Biden administration.
So do you think the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the weaker position on Israel, the refusal to send certain type of weapons, for example, do you think this has emboldened Iran and the so-called emerging axis of evil, Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia?
Yeah, there's no question. So, in fact, today marks the anniversary of the fall of Kabul. And what a disgraceful, humiliating surrender to the Taliban by the Americans and our NATO allies, raising the Taliban flag, enslaving all women in that country. What they left behind, Americans, partners, weapons, Bagram Air Base, the whole thing. And most importantly, from a foreign policy standpoint, this is when things started to change for the worse. This is when the foreign policy started to get bad. And that was, we saw it within a month, plans from Putin to invade Ukraine. That wasn't by accident, it was by design. He saw a weak president, a fall of Afghanistan where he saw weakness, and he thought, this is my moment, this is my legacy. And we warned the world about this because we saw it on the satellite imagery, and no one wanted to believe this could actually happen, but it did. And what happened prior to that? Putin meets with Chairman Xi in Beijing, and they form what I call the unholy alliance, where the two of them plot to take over Europe and the Pacific, not unlike my father's war of World War II. My dad bombed the Nazis in Europe. But the other axis of evil, if you will, or unholy alliance, is the Ayatollah, and then Kim Jong-un. So what has happened since Afghanistan? We've seen the invasion of Ukraine. We've seen the Ayatollah rear his ugly head, and it's an octopus with tentacles through their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi rebels, and now you have the Pacific, and the threat to the Pacific could be the most catastrophic if not handled properly, because this would lead to a world war and a clash that would be on a size we probably have never seen.
And do you think that is possible, that we could be looking at that sort of third world war?
It's up to China. It's up to Chairman Xi if he wants to continue this aggression. If he invades Taiwan, if he threatens the Philippines, if he takes the South China Sea, we have to respond to this. We have to be leaders of the free world.
And is America up to the fight?
I believe they would be. And if you look at not only the principles at stake here and communist China trying to take the Pacific, I think, but also the economics of 60% of the trade goes through the Taiwan Straits, South China Sea, and then again shutting down 90% of the advanced semiconductors. The world would have an economic shutdown if that happens.
Yeah, a major recession. We've just spoken about the weakness of the Biden administration in foreign policy. What about the isolationist section of the Republican Party that we are seeing emerge, parts of the Republican Party that don't think the United States should be involved in foreign wars, not even lend financial support? There's been resistance to that. Does that concern you that there is this growing strength?
Yeah. Well, it's nothing new. We saw this in the late 1930s before World War, before we got involved in World War II. I think, Reagan talked about peace through strength, though, being leaders of the free world. He didn't believe in isolationism.
Yes.
I think you can't retreat from the world and shrink from our responsibilities and think the threat's going to go away, because it's going to get worse. I think if I could speak on their behalf, they're just tired of seeing Americans pick up the bill for every conflict, whether it be in Europe or the Pacific. They want allies and partners who step up to the plate, who build their own militaries, which is what AUKUS is all about, and in the Europe, to get them to pay the 2% of their GDP towards their military. I think that's what they really want to see. They don't want America going alone, fixing all the world's problems. So I get that sentiment.
Yeah.
But I do think we cannot shrink from global responsibilities. We need to lead.
Yeah. Very important to have a strong United States in terms of global leadership. Turning to US politics domestically, you've been outspoken about the security flaws that led to the attempted assassination on Donald Trump. How concerned are you about the fact that a shooter was able to be on the roof, people saw him, and action wasn't taken in time? He was able to fire off shots, and there was a near miss.
No, Sherry, I went out to the site right after. So one of the first members to go up on the rooftop, very close. I mean, it's closer than that is to us.
Yeah.
And a sniper, it's an easy shot. Thank God he missed. But he was too close. He should never have been there. I think Secret Service made some fundamental mistakes. But it all goes back to the leadership within Secret Service, and also the communications with the local police on the ground. I think it was anytime you have an attempted assassination, that is by definition a failure. And I think that was a failure.
Do you think there's still a lot we don't know about what exactly unfolded on that day?
I mean, we know a lot more about the individual, a deranged individual. Again, he was, for a 20-year-old, pretty smart. I mean, he had a drone that he, 3 days earlier, got an aerial surveillance map of the place. He walked around, scouted it out, very methodical. I think he was startled when the local police officer climbed up on the roof and he fired his shot, maybe too hastily for him, and that probably saved the president's life.
Yeah, unbelievable. We've seen quite a dramatic reinvention of Kamala Harris. She wasn't considered a particularly capable VP. Now people are as excited about her, or the left-leaning media are at least, as they were about Barack Obama. What do you make of this transformation virtually overnight?
Well, to me, it's kind of Hollywood. It's like a reinvention of her. And I'm sure the Obama machine is behind this to make her look like a new, attractive candidate. But where has she been the last 3-4 years? And what has she done? She has no record. In fact, the only job responsibility she had was the border czar, which she failed miserably at. And I think that issue in America is going to drive this election.
And she's avoiding media interviews, of course?
Of course. I think she's a little bit ahead in the poll, so why expose yourself? And remember during COVID, Biden didn't really have to come out of the basement a whole lot. So
we had the excuse of the pandemic. That excuse isn't there now.
That's right. That's right. And she should.
I just want to ask you about the Israel-Hamas war. you concerned that we have seen this reluctance by the United States to wholeheartedly support Israel? You know, I mentioned Biden's refusal to hand over some weapons. Israel is under threat on all sides. Yes, Iran's behind it, but Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels. Do you think the US should be stronger in its support of its closest ally in the Middle East?
Yeah, I've always felt that way. I think this is not, this is not just Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi rebels. This is really a conflict, a fight between Iran and Israel. And any daylight between the United States, Israel's greatest ally partner, exposes them to the bigger threat. They've withheld, my administration has withheld weapons. I sign off on all foreign military sales, including the AUKUS sales here, and they've held them up, they've stalled them. That's a dangerous signal to our allies, and it worries me. And I think there's a narrative out there. If you look at the younger generation, the only news they have is primarily TikTok, which we know is driven by algorithms that are driven by China, Russia, and Iran. So all they see is the Palestinian plight. Now, I'm very empathetic to them, but we need to finish this and move on to the normalization. Any talks of ceasefire, while it sounds great, it remains, it keeps Sinwar in power, Hamas in power, and this cannot be finalized until Hamas is out of power.
There needs to be a new governing body in Gaza to
100%.
move forward for the war to end.
For the Palestinians, I've talked to the Saudis very extensively about this. They're in the best position to form a governance for the Palestinians, but we can't get to the normalization.
You've spoken to them about helping with the process after the war.
Oh, yeah, 100%. They are very engaged. They're keenly interested. They want to be a part of a new Middle East, a normalization that involves a reconstruction that they would, in most part, fund, but also, most importantly, a security alliance between the United States, Israel, and the Saudis. We haven't seen anything like this. Well, the Abraham Accords were a big step forward. Jordan and Egypt, very courageous. But this would be a game changer in the Middle East that could finally bring peace. But we can't get to that point, Sharri, until Hamas is over.
Yeah. And what do you think of the unrest we're seeing at university campuses around the world? And what do you think of this confusion of the young generation who seem to be siding with brutal, barbaric terrorists?
Because that's all they see. I think they think it's kind of in style and it's kind of cool. If you ask them what river and what sea you're talking about, they would know it's the Jordan and the Mediterranean. I don't think they really understand historically what they're standing up for. Hamas killed on October 7th, thousands of Jews, Jewish people. My dad bombed the Nazis. They had concentration camps. They killed the Jews. We formed the state of Israel because of the Holocaust. And I don't think they understand the history.
I mean, your dad would never have left a single person behind in a concentration camp, but the suggestion now from those who call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire is that, well, the hostages should be forgotten, even baby Kafir.
Right, and that's a very sensitive. I've met with the families. It's heart-wrenching. Yeah. Most of them are stuck in the tunnels. But remember, Sinwar and Hamas, they hold them as human shields. They're very calculating, very shrewd, and in fact, very evil the way they abuse their own people, hospitals, schools. So when you see some bombings, they're using that as shields. And I think the Palestinian people are really getting tired of Hamas exploiting them. And they're tired of this war, and I think everybody is. We want to see it come to a conclusion. But again, it can't end unless Hamas is finished.
You were in question time in Canberra yesterday in Parliament House. The big political issue this week has been whether there is enough security vetting of Palestinians who are coming to Australia from the war zone in Gaza. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has said that at this point in time, given there are no Australian officials on the ground able to do the interviews and the security checks, he said there shouldn't be any Palestinians coming to Australia. What do you think?
Yeah, it was interesting to be, in the Parliament, see my counterparts in Australia. They got a little rowdy with their questions and answers series, which I kind of enjoyed.
More rowdy than in the US?
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun to see that in the United States, the interchange and having the Prime Minister on the floor taking, hits from the opposition. And I can't imagine the President of the United States sitting in the well of
and having
Congress doing
people
that.
hurl insults at him. Yeah.
And then they take down the insults.
Yeah.
And, it was
Please withdraw that.
Kind
there
of
were a couple
amusing,
yesterday.
to me.
Yeah.
We always think, the Brits are more civilized, but sometimes, and then the Australians, but it's very rowdy. But to answer your question, I think, and I chaired the Homeland Security Committee for a long time as a federal prosecutor, counterterrorism, and I'm very sympathetic to the Palestinian people who have been held hostage by Hamas, really. We want to find a safe haven, but you have to properly vet individuals before you bring them in to your country. Otherwise, you could be bringing in, ticking time bombs, Hamas or other terrorists that could cause problems. In my own country, after the fall of Afghanistan, thousands of ISIS-K came out of the Bagram prisons. They went up to the Khorasan region, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan. They made it all the way to the Mexican border, came up through Mexico into the United States, and 8 of them are detained. They also had a smuggling ring, and God knows how many more in the United States, and that worries me.
And the most important thing, the greatest obligation of any political leader is to protect your own citizens first and foremost, to protect national security.
That's, I think, the most important oath of any office, whether it's Congress or the Prime Minister or the President, is to protect people from outside threats. And that's what China represents today. I think what was exciting for me is within the last year or so to see these alliances take place here, to see the funding that my Congress, that I've helped get passed, but then to see AUKUS actually start happening.
Yes.
This will bring the nuclear submarines, but it'll also bring I think for your viewers, an exciting technology revolution and innovation, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all this great power competition we have with China. We can now work with Australia, United States, and UK to beat them at this game.
Do you think both sides of United States politics are equally as committed to AUKUS? Do you think Australians can rest assured that this will go through, that we will have nuclear-powered submarines, irrespective of whoever's in power?
Yes, I do. And, I made sure when the bill I passed was bipartisan. Very important that we not play politics with this. One nation, one voice. Australia, I can tell you, I met with your leadership from the top down. Everyone is strongly supportive. That was exciting to see. And there was a small amount of opposition, maybe to the nuclear piece, but that is not used in any way for nuclear projection. It's just to power the submarines. And this will project power and strength to China. And what's happening in Darwin was really interesting and important to me.
You were just in Darwin this week.
To see the rotational forces of our U.S. Marines that rotate in and out, our Ospreys, to see our other allied nations coming through Darwin. Darwin is sort of the ground, or the sort of the epicenter of the organization of projecting power through the South China Sea to China. And, getting these alliances there sends a very strong message to Chairman Xi that the risk outweighs the reward.
How soon do you think we'll have nuclear-powered submarines in Australia?
Well, I think you're going to see rotations soon. In fact, the certification on Pillar 2, which is the innovation and technology, will come out in the States probably later today, and you'll hear about it here tomorrow.
What do you mean rotations?
Subs, U.S.-class subs that will rotate through Perth and other ports in Australia.
As a show of strength to China?
Showing of force.
And they'll be nuclear-powered submarines.
Correct. Yeah.
That's incredible. So when are you expecting that to begin?
Well, we've been waiting for the certification process. The Euro Parliament, the Australian Parliament, was required to pass export control laws, which they did. I was very proud of them. And now we can begin, because, you know, when I meet with the intelligence community, this thing, AUKUS, this alliance between the United States, UK, and Australia, is probably the thing that keeps Chairman Xi up the most at night. It's the thing he worries about. It's the thing that really scares him. And when you have that, you have deterrence. And if you have deterrence, you don't have war.
And you're confident Donald Trump would be committed to AUKUS should he become president again?
I do. You know, the whole idea started with Secretary Pompeo. I talked to Mike Pompeo. He talked to your Director of National Intelligence about this idea. So it's really an extension of something that started under the Trump administration. I love history, and I study my father's generation quite a bit. I was at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in your capital city. I was in the Philippines, 55,000 Americans buried there. I was at Normandy for the 80th anniversary of Normandy and the sacrifices that they gave. The parallels between the late 1930s and today are very real. History does repeat itself, and I don't want it to repeat itself in the Pacific.
Do you mean in terms of anti-Semitism or global volatility it's repeating itself?
I think in terms of a world war. You know, we haven't seen a threat to Europe this size since World War II. Even according to your Director of National Intelligence, we haven't seen a threat like this to the Pacific since World War II. And now we have the Middle East on fire with the Ayatollah.
And Iran is clearly emboldened.
Oh, 100%. They're, because of Afghanistan, because of the failures to put sanctions on China, who have revitalized the Russian military, when they see weakness, our enemies become empowered, and they feel emboldened right now. And that's why President Xi is being so aggressive. He's emboldened. I asked President Marcos in the Philippines, why do you think he's doing this? Because he feels emboldened now. And it's because we're not projecting power and strength, rather weakness. And historically, Chamberlain did this with Hitler. Hitler laughed at him, said it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. Churchill came in, appeasement doesn't work. Churchill projected power. Churchill told my president at that time, Roosevelt, that it was the unnecessary war because it could have been prevented earlier on. That's why I'm here to provide deterrence to Communist China.
Do you think that the $6 billion that the US gave Iran as part of that nuclear deal shortly before October 7 was part of the problem?
Oh, I think, these hostages, I love seeing hostages come home, but these are some of the worst negotiations. Even the one with Russia, you know, Brittany Griner, the basketball player, you know, traded for the merchant of death, you know, from Russia. We gave Iran $6 billion for these hostages to come home. In addition, we were not enforcing the energy sanctions, which was funding all these terror operations in the Middle East, almost to $100 billion. And the drones and weapons exported from Iran, we were not sanctioning, and rather allowing them to send that to Russia to kill Ukrainians, but also to kill Israelis. So on the National Security Supplemental, we put those sanctions back in, and we made them mandatory that you have to enforce these. Yeah. I would argue with China, with these, the way they've helped the Russians in their military, they need to be sanctioned as well.
Yeah, because we are seeing supplying of weapons for different conflicts at the moment, as you say. Michael McCaul, a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Sharri. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.